Hello there. If you've watched a number of these devotionals, you will have heard me sometimes refer to the different categories of Psalms. These are different groupings identified by the commentators as they identify common traits and characteristics. So you've got enthronement Psalms and Psalms of lament and so on, and these are very helpful categories. Well, I have my own category, and I don't think you'll find it in any of the commentaries. It's a category I call epics, and Psalm 107, which is where we are today, and which opens the fifth and the last book of the Psalter, certainly qualifies as a truly epic psalm. It's a psalm that celebrates God's work of salvation and redemption on behalf of his people. And it illustrates that work by referring to different experiences his people have faced and in which they've cried to him for help. It seems fairly certain that it was written originally to celebrate the return of the exiles from Babylon, in which case it fits wonderfully well with the great historical psalms we've just looked at, 105 and 106. See, 105 took us into the promised land, 106 ended with God's people in exile, and now 107 sees them returning home. But most, if not all of us, could identify with one or more of the scenarios depicted in this psalm. So it's a great psalm to personalize in that way. I remember first really engaging with this psalm in a ministry context when we were seeking to help a young woman who was suffering from extreme anorexia, and to be able to read to her from verses 17 onwards about how God redeemed and helped and delivered those who, through their own sinful ways, loathed any kind of food. I recently read a powerful exposition of this psalm, which related it to the experiences of the Pilgrim Fathers as they journeyed to the States and they settled there. And there's clear historical evidence that they appropriated this psalm as their own testimony. It's a very simple psalm to structure, and we're going to do it in this way. Verses 1 to 3, there's a praise for God's deliverance. 4 to 32, pictures of God's deliverance, and 33 to 43, principles of God's providence. So first of all, briefly, 1 to 3, praise for God's deliverance. The psalm opens with a now familiar call to worship, exactly the same as the openings of 105 and 106. Give thanks to the Lord for his goodness demonstrated in his enduring and steadfast love. And then in the next section, 4 to 32, the heart of the psalm comes in a series of 4 pictures of how God exercises that steadfast love to his people in times of trouble and danger, each one following a similar, though not identical, structure. So in verses 4 to 9, he satisfies the hearts of the homeless. In 10 to 16, he breaks the chains of the prisoners. In 17 to 22, he heals the sick and delivers them from death. In 23 to 32, he stills the storms of life. But let's just notice a few features. In the second and third of those 4 pictures, there's a direct link between their trouble and their sin, verse 11 and verse 17. In each of the 4 scenarios, we read these words, "Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress." And also in all 4, in response to God's deliverance and help, his people exclaim, "Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man." In the first and second pictures, this call to return thanks to the Lord is followed by a specific reason. For he satisfies, verse 9. For he shatters, verse 16. And in the third and fourth picture, this call to return thanks is followed by an instruction as to how to go about that, verse 22 and verse 23. And then the third section of this psalm, verses 33 to 43, principles of God's providence. So from specific instances and examples, our psalmist now sets out some general and observable ways in which God's providence is seen in our lives. You see, God can and God does make springs of water dry up or turn deserts into pools of water. He exalts the humble and he brings low the proud. And all of it in response, as it were, to the wickedness or neediness of people. So verses 33 to 34, he can turn plenty into nothing because of the sins of the people. While in 35 to 38, he can provide plenty out of nothing for the needy. In 39 to 42, he comes to the aid of the oppressed and humbles the oppressors, but blesses the oppressed. But the key to all of this is the sovereign providence of God. See, these things don't just happen. That's the point the psalmist wants to make. Verse 33, he turns. Verse 35, he turns. Verse 36, he lets. Verse 38, by his blessing. Verse 38, he does not let. Verse 40, he pours contempt. He makes them wonder. Verse 41, he raises up the needy and makes their families like flocks. Now, says the psalmist, as he draws to a close in verse 43, if you are wise, you will see the hand of God in all these situations. This is not chance. This is not fate. This is not just the way the world is. This is the providence of God at work. And the providence of God is the outworking of his steadfast love towards his people. Doesn't that make you feel secure? Doesn't that make you want to give thanks to the Lord for his steadfast love? I certainly hope so. The Lord bless you and the Lord keep you until next time.